Hello everyone and welcome to the webinar. Um, my name is Lance Wilson. I'm a policy analyst here at Jobs Australia, and I'm just going to do a quick introduction before I hand over to our speakers today from the Nous Group, and I'll let them introduce themselves shortly. For now, I just want to go through a few things about how we use the system here. So you should have some controls on your screen that appear a bit like this, and in the dialog box on the right of your screen you'll see some controls. The most important ones are your virtual hand, and you can click on this at any time to raise it if you want to ask a question, and at that point we can unmute you and you'll be able to ask a question, and hopefully our speakers will be able to respond. Your microphone icon, at the moment we have everyone muted just because background noise can be a bit disruptive. If you do have a question, we will unmute you so that so that everyone can hear you. Now this shows the audio controls. If you're using a microphone and headset on your computer and the sound isn't working too well, then you can try using a telephone. You just select use telephone and follow the instructions that come up on the screen. You'll also notice that the question or chat box is below that, so you can type in things there at any time, and we'll also respond through that box. Now, webinars tend to be a bit more interesting when there's some discussion and Q&A, and our speakers today will pause from time to time for any questions, but you can also feel free to ask a question at any time. So there's two ways of doing that. The first is to raise your virtual hand, which, as I said earlier, when you do this, we'll unmute you so that you can ask a question. And the second is to type a question into that box, and we'll get to it when we can. So that's the system. And without further ado, I'm going to let our speakers get on with the webinar. Thank you.
Great, thanks Lance. Thanks everyone for joining us. I'm Stephen Petris. I'm a principal with the Nous Group. I think most of you know us quite well through your association with Zach Ashkenazi, who's a colleague of mine. I lead the strategy practice in Nous Group. I'm here with a colleague of mine, Lauren Douge, who's head of marketing, and together we're both responsible for innovation at Nous. The catalyst for this webinar was a conversation with David Thompson about the Empowering Youth initiative and the work that many of you will be engaged in terms of thinking about proposals in response to the Empowering Youth initiative, and especially the brief, which was this time around we're looking for proposals that feature ideas that offer new ways to help young people explore innovative approaches to service delivery and are creative in engaging with young people on their path to employment. So there's a lot of code in there. When people talk about innovative approaches, that now has quite a distinct meaning. So in response to that challenge, we thought we'd like to cover, so what do we now mean by innovative approaches? If you're pitching a proposal, what should you be reflecting or paying attention to? What's our method for innovative service design? So we'll dive a bit into the way that we approach innovative service design challenges and give you some examples of how we apply them in practice. And finally, given the task of some of you in terms of a brief, we thought it might not be a bad idea to finish with, and then how do you pitch to government and funding bodies to get support for an innovative idea? So there are three areas that we'll touch on. So what do we mean by innovative approaches? I guess historically, actually just the lead-in slide, innovation is on the top of everyone's tongue at the moment, isn't it? E.g., the release of the innovation statement just earlier this week. Australia of the future has to be a nation that is agile, innovative, creative. So everyone's talking about this. What do we mean by innovative approaches? Well, traditionally, we often thought of innovation as a pipeline. We sort of distinguished it from creativity, the art and the processes around creating new ideas, and talked about the journey that new ideas take through testing and piloting and ultimately roll out in diffusion. And we described it a bit of a pipeline. That's still true, but not so useful in terms of demonstrating you're in touch with what's fresh and new and different in innovation. What is fresh and new is a whole lot of different strands of ideas that come from different sources about how to tackle innovation, especially innovative service design. I'm sure some of you know some of these, but obviously design thinking is a key source of inspiration for innovative methods. So is lean startup, so is agile computing, so are other sort of streams. And they all offer something. They all offer something in terms of innovative approaches. The tricks kind of decide which one's going to be the most useful and how to weave them together. And to do that, the most useful thing I've read on innovation for a long time, and I can't really recommend this highly enough, is a book that came out late last year, I think, The Innovator's Method. And it did two really useful things. The first thing it did was to say all these approaches, all these methods in innovation, they're sourced from different places. So design thinking comes from the world of design and engineering, agile from the world of computer science, lean startup from the world of entrepreneurs. They all come from different places, but actually they're all describing the same approach, the same method. They just emphasize different parts of it. And then that method, it gives that a bit more definition. So sure, it's a pipeline, but actually each parts of that pipeline now get a bit more definition as in terms of what's fresh in innovation. And if you stepped through it left to right, you'd think the first part of it is much more about exploration. Exploration, asking questions, questioning, experimenting, getting some more insight about the nature of the problem you're grappling with. And then the sort of second phase is a little bit about, and to do that we really need to deeply understand the experience of users or customers or those who engage with our services and programs, and not just by asking them about their experience. We need to observe them. We need to design ways to get real insight about what makes them tick, how they make decisions, how they think about our programs and initiatives. And the third part is, and then once we've got an idea about what might work, we've got to design clever ways to experiment with that, small first in prototypes, and then gradually scale up as we learn more. And then ultimately the last bit is scaling up, because if we've got something that's new and we're confident that it's going to work through experimenting, the scale up is a new challenge. So so that's nice and neat in terms of what are the sorts of themes that you'd hope to see in an initiative or a program that was sourced in innovative approaches and methods. Now, this is still not enough, and it's got some flaws, and one of the flaws is it still imagines this as a pipeline, as a process that you step through, and actually it's much more iterative than that. So we'll return to this in a little bit later in this webinar in terms of what's the way to explore each of these elements of what's good in terms of innovative approaches, innovative methods. This is a key point, I think. So it's important to think about when do these approaches apply, because they don't apply all the time. And a way to think about that is it depends on the nature of the problem that you're grappling with you're struggling with. These are all problem-solving tools in the end, problem-solving approaches. And while there are lots of different ways of categorizing problems, some of you, I'm sure, are aware of wicked problems and the Cynefin framework, the difference between simple and complicated and complex and chaotic problems and how they all require a different approach. But stripped right down to it, I think a nice, more simpler way to think about it is that every promoter of innovative approaches thinks in terms of there are two types of problems here. There are the less complex problems, lower levels of uncertainty, the sorts of problems where we pretty much get it straight away. We understand the nature of the problem. So in our world, so leader of strategy, if an organisation came to me and said, we need to refresh our strategic plan, we need to do some analysis of key external drivers, what's changing in the operating environment, what are our key stakeholders' expectations, what are our capabilities, how have we been performing, and use all that data to decide, so what changes should we make to our products and services. Then straight away I go, well, I understand that problem, I've seen it many times before. It doesn't require some of the approaches we've talked about, because actually I know what approaches work. And it's going to be mostly about success in terms of good planning and good execution. The success of that program or initiative is, or my support of that is a function of whether we do the planning well and we execute well. On the other side, there are those problems where not only am I not sure about the solution yet, I'm really not even sure about the nature of the problem. These are the environments that are much more complex, much more uncertain. And so if I was to use my analogy of doing some work on a piece of strategic planning for a client, well, they would probably come to me with, we don't know what we really need to do. We just know that we're worried about digital disruption. We're worried about significant cuts to government funding. We're worried about the current suite of products and services we offer are not going to cut it for the future. We're just not sure what to do next, what the next step is. And then it's not only not clear about the solution, but then you think, what's the right way to approach this problem too? There's not necessarily frameworks or problem-solving approaches that I can go to readily. And in fact, success here is not actually going to be about taking those frameworks and planning and executing. It's more going to be about learning and insight. If we can find ways of engaging with that type of problem that yields some real insights or some real learnings, that's success. It's a different measure of success. In fact, your measures of success then are more about how much have I learned, or what insights have we been able to gain that are useful and valuable. So often this is sort of the first step in the diagnostic. What sort of problem am I grappling with? Because if we're on the right-hand side, then we should be turning to those innovative methods that we've described earlier, because they're all about getting traction, finding ways to move forward, finding ways to discover new types of services that are going to make sense in environments where there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of complexity.
And it would be fair to say that over on the right there where you've got learning and insight, that's often where you're dealing with behaviour that you want to try and shift and you don't really understand it. You're noticing a change in how people are behaving, but what's behind it and why and what might work to shift that, you're sort of in unknown territory.
Yep. Now, very crudely, I'd say in our world, 20% of our problems are on the right, 80% are on the left, at least historically. But that's changing. And not only is it too crude, often problems have elements of both in it, but it's also changing. There seems to be more and more clients coming to us at Nous in the right-hand side. And why is that? Why is innovation the new black? Well, I'm sure you know this story, but because there are lots of drivers in the external operating environment at the moment that are creating higher levels of complexity, higher levels of uncertainty, they are different for every organisation, but typically, people turn to these. They say, in terms of our organisation, the products and services we offer to clients, it's getting harder. It's getting more complex. We're not certain about what the next step is, how we should evolve or adapt for these kind of reasons. Reasons like the productivity push and the demand to find new ways and different ways that are not incremental and being more efficient, driving productivity under new kind of drivers and incentives, especially with the introduction of market-based incentives for many sectors that didn't traditionally experience those. Digital disruption is everywhere, of course, and I think there might even be a webinar that sort of complements this one by a colleague of mine. On digital disruption that may not be organised yet, but of course everyone's wondering about the impact of digital technologies and how they're disrupting business and service models, and then what's the response in terms of taking advantage of digital disruption.
And there's a point there at the bottom about how we're seeing a lot of innovation because there's this idea that there's no such thing as a new idea, there's just new combinations of existing ideas. And as more and more people are connecting online and new parts of the world are getting online, there's more voices on the internet and more ideas are being connected, and every time a new idea is formed through that, we're getting more and more innovation. So there's a sense that the pace and scale of innovation generally is increasing, but it's because we're connecting with each other in ways that we haven't been able to before.
Yep, and that's a nice segue to another key driver that everyone points to, is that customers' expectations or consumer expectations are changing and rising in virtually every sector we come across. And that's partly because they've seen what's possible in terms of service and digital disruption or digital technologies. So there's much more of an expectation of personalised, responsive, empowering services, better end-to-end service experience, the opportunity to engage and shape through co-design, those types of services, shape the value proposition, shape experience. So while organisations are responding, customers, users of services are often a step ahead in terms of their expectations.
And we've also got what's called digital natives now, which are the people that were born with the sort of technology we're used to, and so they have no fear of it, and they're just expecting everything to be digitally enabled in some way, and so that's putting pressure on services that haven't yet done that.
And finally, all of this is taking place under well, in environments where there's financial constraints, but also environments with lots of opportunities. So people are seeing people experimenting with new service, new business models, and that offer much more than the trade-off between service and cost. They offer new ways of creating value that achieve both, and there's opportunity there. These are four kind of drivers: trends in the external operating environment contributing to more complexity, more uncertainty, but more opportunity. As I said, the list is always a bit different, but these are more or less the things that keep coming back. And in producing a proposal, these are the sorts of trends that I would reference in terms of why innovation, or why do we need a new approach? Why is this idea going to get traction? Why do we need to think more differently about this service, this approach, this engagement with a customer or client?
Just wondering, should we pause for questions at this point, see if we've got any,
Sure.
any there?
I'm not sure we have any.
So we don't have any questions yet, but remember that if you do want to ask a question, it's just a matter of raising your virtual hand or typing one into the question box. And if one comes along, then we'll make sure that we stop to respond.
Awesome.
Fantastic. Just to finish this section, why it might be useful to know that I said earlier we're increasingly striking people, clients all the time who are saying we're looking for fresh approaches, fresh ways of operating, more innovation in our approaches in the context of organisations that are much more complex, or environments that are much more complex and uncertain. And we respond in quite a few different ways. So we've talked today about service design, and we'll dive into that a bit in a minute, but also in the area of strategy. So people once were, well, we've had conventional approaches to strategic planning and strategy development more generally, and they're frustrating for many people, and certainly frustrating in dynamic environments. So new ways of tackling strategy, fast strategy, more agile strategy, with a nod to innovative approaches are emerging. Similarly, in the way we design organisations, we've had traditional approaches for how you reorganise or restructure organisations in order to realise strategy, and they frustrate people too. They destroy value every time we have to change organisational structures. And as the world speeds up, the pace of the environments we operate increases. We don't have the same tolerance of continually reorganising to align organisations with strategy. So where can we get some inspiration from more adaptive organisations, or organisations that are more agile is another sort of stream of thinking in this area. And even more than agile, this is a nice little slide from the book, Anti-Fragile. It's kind of a nice reminder that all the disruption in the environment can be threatening, but it can also be a great opportunity. Some organisations try and be robust in the face of adversity. Some try and be agile and nurture the capabilities associated with agility, i.e. how can I be more sensitive to the changes in the environment? How can I build cohesive leadership teams that are constantly swapping intelligence and ideas? How do I put resources quickly into new opportunities as they arise? Those are the sorts of things that are associated with agile companies, agile organisations. Or a sort of a new idea emerging, how do we be just anti-fragile, i.e. we grow and improve from external shocks. They're good for us. We seize the opportunity. So other sorts of ideas that are now sort of starting to flavour the way we think about the way organisations set themselves up in the context of these kind of drivers. Well, now, so that's sort of an overview of when we talk innovative approaches. There's kind of a emerging body of ideas that people are looking to for inspiration. It's worth referencing them. What about our method for service innovation?
So here at NOUS we've been doing a bit of work on our own approach that's based on the sort of literature and ideas we were just talking about there, but then the experience we've had working with our clients over time. And so we've got a method that I guess has three parts. The first part is a set of principles that we apply to what we do. The second is the kind of mindset that we try and cultivate both in ourselves and in the clients that we're working with. And then the third is a process, and the process is a bit different to our traditional processes because it recognises that this stuff can be a little bit messy and a bit iterative and not quite as neat and linear and structured as perhaps projects have been in the past. So the ideas and methods here can be applied broadly to a range of different contexts. So we've used them with startups and with businesses that are looking at an entirely new product or service line. And as an example of that, we have a new business in NOUS that we've called NOUS Apps, and we've applied this discipline to that. And similarly, it can be applied in private, public or not-for-profit environments where there's a service that they want to rethink. And it usually applies, as Stephen was saying, when it's a little less certain what the answer is. You're not going into it sort of with an idea. It's pretty much a step into the unknown in a way. And so you're wanting to break new ground and really rethink or reimagine how it could work. So if we go to the next slide. So these are some of the design principles that we're applying to this sort of work. And essentially here, these three principles are all about bringing the customer or the user or the citizen right into the heart of what we're doing. So rather than beavering away in a back room and coming up with a design and then launching it and going ta-da and hoping that it works, we're actually involving the end users from the very beginning. So getting them, like spending time with them early to understand what is it that really motivates them, what do they need, what are they feeling, what are the jobs they're trying to do or goals they're trying to achieve, and sort of get a deep understanding of that first. And then design backwards from that. So whether it's technology or other things, that's the sort of starting point, is the outside and the customers and the segments. And we use our deep understanding of that to then think about possibilities. Rather than thinking internally about our own point of view inside a business, we start much more from the outside and work in. So we involve them from the start and the whole way through, and we apply an iterative approach where we don't go too far along the journey without testing again with customers or users whether what we're thinking is going to work for them, whether it resonates, how they respond. And every time they engage with something that we're working on and they respond to it, we learn something new and it helps refine and improve what we're doing. And because a lot of the models and service ideas now are new and different and maybe haven't been tried and tested and are unfamiliar, this is a really important way of managing or mitigating the risk. It stops you from going too far down a path without working out, oh, actually my assumptions and ideas on this were completely wrong, and actually people behave and respond to my ideas differently than what I thought they would. So if we go to the next one. So as I was saying, that the second part is about mindset, and the mindset in this sort of work is actually pretty fun. There's sort of an intellectual curiosity, adventuring aspect to it. So as I said, if you want to completely rethink something, you're stepping a bit into the unknown and into some ambiguity and trusting that if you use the right process and think the right way, you'll find your way through it. So some of the mindsets that we cultivate in ourselves and in others is firstly a sense of empathy. So in order to really create something that's going to work for someone else who thinks about the world differently to you, you really need to understand that and put your preconceived ideas aside and listen very carefully and sort of dig deeply into why people are thinking and feeling what they are. To come up with something new, you need to be willing to go and explore possibilities and get inspiration in weird and wonderful places. So there's that great example of how Steve Jobs did a course in calligraphy at university. He was just interested in it. He just liked new and different things. He didn't know if it'd ever be any use. But then when he got to that point where he was designing some of the products that we're all using and loving now, some of those ideas around the sort of that elegant simplicity of design then informed what he did later. So if you wanted to come up with new and different things, you kind of need to be broadly interested in the world and go hunting for ideas and possibilities in different sectors and places. And you may never know when they'll pop up and be useful, but just exploring generally helps. Another important idea is collaboration. So as we were saying before, new things are often the combination of existing ideas. And so in the same way, if you have lots of diverse people in a room trying to solve a problem, you'll come up with something much more interesting than if you have the same sort of people in the room doing that. So we try and bring together lots of different perspectives to see what will emerge from that. And sort of one of the last ones there that's really important is courage and being willing to get it wrong and to put lots of crazy ideas on the table, even knowing that some of them might get laughed at and be silly. And you can't come up with anything interesting if you're only ever wanting to put out there things that are safe and that you've seen before. And so there's an important organisational cultural aspect to that. So when we run workshops, we try and prime people to say, hey, this should be fun, be a bit playful. If there are crazy ideas here, then we're likely to catch on to something that's interesting. So yeah, that's a bit about mindset for this sort of work. Now this crazy train network transport / micro digital chip diagram is, I guess, our overarching framework for innovation, and it's saying a couple of things. The first is that, as we said before, innovation isn't necessarily neat and clean and easy. It's a little bit more of a mishmash of things coming together. And it can also have many different starting points. So we've got here 4 places sort of this diagram branches out into. But the 3 at the top are really where the creative process can start. So it could begin with an imperative. So for example, there might be a change in how your customers or citizens are behaving. You're not getting the value or the outcomes or the benefit from your programs that you're used to. And so there's something there that means we need to act. We can't keep doing things the same way we always have. We're just not getting enough value from what we're doing. Or it could be that if you're in the private sector, you've got a competitor that's doing something quite interesting and they're starting to steal your market share, so you need to act on that. It's almost like the strategic business case, there's something's going wrong here, we need to act. So that can be a starting point. But you could also start over there in the blue section where you might be talking to customers or observing their behaviour and thinking, hang on, there's something interesting here, there's a possibility that we haven't explored. And just by seeing what they're wanting and what they're doing, we can get a better idea of what we could do that's different. So that blue section is really about the way you research what customers need and want. Over to the right there, we're sort of in the area of inspiration, is to say that sometimes the innovation process starts with someone just having a big idea. They wake up in the middle of the night and go, hang on, I know something we could do. And if that's the starting point, then you sort of need to bring it back in and say, well, is there enough of an imperative to act on that? And do we have enough insight into our customers or users to tell us that that's a good idea and they're going to respond? So the first 3, imperative, insight, and inspiration, they sort of need to be mixed together and make sure that they fit. And out of that should come some interesting ideas and possibilities through brainstorming and collaboration, or even just an individual brewing on a problem for a while. Those 3 things can create the kernel of an idea. And then we sort of push down into the green section there where it's about iteration. So creating mock-ups of your idea and starting to test that early and quickly with users and clients and others. So yeah, basically this is saying that innovation brings a number of different things together and that it can have a number of different starting points. And to show how we've used this, I thought I'll just talk you through a recent example of a project that we've done, which was with Monash University, and they were wanting to refresh their on-campus experience for students. they had a sense that their competitors, particularly Deakin University, were doing a lot more around student experience, and they were a bit behind, and they were maybe losing students because of that. So there's a real imperative here around market share and their competitive positioning. And also they knew that an important part of the student experience was what it was like on campus. So was it an active, vibrant, great place to be, or was it dead? And, you know, the sort of leaves whistle through the courtyard, but there's not really much going on. And they were finding, because a lot of the lecture content was now online, students had less of a reason to go, and they might just go briefly and then leave. And so the campus was it's becoming quite dead, and particularly outside of, you know, the core central hours of the day. It's like, okay, we need to do something about this. And the executives knew, looking at the sort of shops they had, like the cafes and bars and other bits and pieces, that they were really tired and old. It was like going to a 1975 food court with, you know, we've got such great food and such great retail in Melbourne that, yeah, they were like, this is a bit sad. We're not really demonstrating the best of what this city has to offer. So that was a bit about the starting point. So if we think about imperative, we spoke to some of their senior executives and had a look around the campus and had a look at what competitors were doing, and said, yeah, you've got a reason to really have a good look at this. So then we went into the insight phase, and what we did here was we did intercepts with students. So we just walk around the campus and watch what they were doing and where they were going, and we just randomly say, hey, we give us 10 minutes, here's a voucher for some free muffins, and that seemed to get them pretty excited. So we'd just stop and ask them then, you know, where do you tend to go? What are you doing? How do you feel about the retail environment? And then we added to that some focus groups where we get different groups of students together to sort of share and bounce off each other and tell us what they wanted. And then we ran a big student survey where we gathered a whole lot of data to understand, you know, what are the things they value most in retail. And so we also did some segmentation where we thought, well, students aren't one size fits all. We've got international, we've got mature age students, we've got graduates, we've got all different ones. We can actually characterise them and look at what they want and paint a picture of that. So we had images and quotes and examples, and we sort of put that up in a room for the more senior executives to look at, to really bring it to life, and so they could get inside the heads of the students. And what was interesting is that the senior executives they also used the campus, and so they were designing the retail environment around what they wanted, which was, you know, they were happy with a $12 focaccia and a glass of wine and somewhere they could take their academic friends to hang out. But the students who had, you know, $5 a day to eat off, and were maybe from overseas where, you know, they're not even interested in some of that food, it was just completely missing the mark. So what was really good about this is being able to show for the senior people exactly how far away they were from understanding the reality of the students and what the students really wanted. And that was a real point where that insight unlocked a whole lot of new possibilities around what we could do. And so we looked for inspiration in all sorts of different places. We looked at other university campuses. So we came up here to Melbourne Uni and walked around with cameras and took photos of what was happening. But we looked overseas, and we looked at general retail trends and other things that were happening around retail, even in Melbourne, to understand what Monash could tap into. So we did a big research piece which included some immersion of ourselves in other settings to understand how does it sort of look and feel when you go into entirely different retail environments. And so that also gave us some interesting possibilities, and particularly it gave us a sense of the fact that retail now is becoming a lot more flexible. There's a lot of like pop-ups and markets and food trucks and different sort of formats that hadn't been around before. And that was really interesting because students were saying, we'll be on this campus maybe for 7 years studying, and it's the same places that are there for 7 years. Like, can we please just shake this up a bit? So one of the ideas that we then started prototyping and piloting with them was almost creating a bit of a food festival environment and bringing different food trucks in for when it's really busy and all the students are there, and creating a bit of a festival atmosphere. And it was fun because the students then wouldn't know exactly what was going to be there on the day, but they could use apps to follow the trucks and know which trucks are going to be on the campus on which days. So we piloted that as a model with them and watched how the students responded. We watched their social media chit-chat to see what they were saying about it, and got a sense from that, when's it working, when's it not, what days or what parts of the campus does this work well on, and even from that, what trucks do they like a lot, and so therefore what might we put in permanently. So it was a way of trialling different sorts of food, for example, that could work beyond that. So it's just I guess a good example of where piloting gave us an opportunity to learn and then think about how we could scale it up over time. So yeah, that's one example that sort of brings all those aspects together. There's another one that Stephen was going to talk to briefly.
Yeah, sure. So just before leaving piloting, so obviously the trick is to get out to your clients or customers as soon as possible with the cheapest possible version of what you're trying to test. And it's all about learning. What do I need to learn about this to know what to try next? And I've learned something, that's success. Yeah, so we thought that's one example, but there's lots of different types of examples in the social sphere too, where we've tried this. So here are 3 quick ones. So one is we've done quite a bit of work on the review of the community experience of bushfires and communities threatened by bushfires. So historically, and I suspect largely still, fire agencies or those responsible for the safety of people would design programs and run programs that are designed to help people understand, if you're threatened by a major fire, this is the sorts of things you should do, these are the sorts of options you have. Should you stay, should you go, should you evacuate early, should you evacuate late, what do you need to have done in terms of preparation of your property, what can you expect from the agencies, what sorts of parts of the messages that disseminate in a whole lot of ways. So they're disseminated through TV and ads, advertising campaigns, but also through community groups, through sort of local grassroots support of people who live in areas threatened by bushfire. And we're largely one size fits all, you'd probably say. So we're having, in this project, we went to 3 communities that had just recently experienced a major fire, and in conjunction with a university partner and a fire agency, and virtually spoke to everyone we could find who was in the area and had some experience of the fire, to deeply understand what was their experience. When did they first find out about this? What did they think when they first found out about it? What was the first thing they did? Who did they talk to? Where do they go for more information? What do they do with their neighbours? And to get a rich picture, a rich story of the experience of each of these people who are living in areas threatened by fire. And as we created those rich pictures, those stories really, those narratives, we probably got more than 100, patterns emerged. And it's the patterns that, and often in these sorts of problems, you're looking for patterns. That's how you make sense of the world. Patterns emerged, and we ended up constructing those patterns as archetypes or personas as a useful way to understand the insights of the range of patterns. And interestingly, 8 quite different archetypes emerged of the very different ways that people responded to fire. So just a couple of examples that illustrate the diversity of those. So there are some people who are very engaged with the risk, and usually will engage with agencies and authorities. They're interested in being involved in community meetings and interested in being involved with any sort of education or any sort of information that agencies put out. They often invest in fire prevention activities, although typically on a piecemeal basis, but they're often a bit well resourced, better resourced than others in their community. They often have less experience of fire than others in their community, and that's kind of one sort of group. But then there are very different archetypes. There are, for example, the archetypes of people who have very confident with their experience of fire, who have no time for agencies, who probably have a very hostile or tense relationship with agencies, who will typically won't listen to any sort of formal information about the fire. They'll go and check out what's going on themselves by driving the ute to the top of the hill and having a look. And they might, in that process save 2 or 3 houses and rescue a couple of people and get themselves in trouble at the same time. So, and there's a range of archetypes like that, and of course, every single one of those archetypes has a very different relationship to the sorts of information or service offered by fire agencies. And so that, of course, the aha moment was we've got to do a lot of tailoring of the way that we warn people, of the way that we engage people, the channels we use to engage people, because one size doesn't feel only is appropriate for one archetype in this case. If that's one example.
And there's a couple of others here. I'll just briefly touch on. These were projects from our colleagues, so not ones that Steve and I were in ourselves, but there was an interesting one with a homeless youth service that we worked with. And they were dealing with some very complex cases, so people with multifaceted issues around mental health, homelessness and assault. And the sense was that this organisation was doing well with some segments, but this very complex segment they were struggling with. And so where traditionally we might not have done too much engagement with that group directly, this project was largely about getting into their minds and understanding their perspective and as I said earlier, sort of designing backwards from that. And the insights both for us and for our client from doing that were much stronger. And there are a couple of things that we learned, and particularly around how they like to be engaged by key workers and a sense that they wanted a little bit more control and empowerment in terms of the information that they could access about themselves that was on file, and that they wanted a bit more choice in who it was that they got to work with, and just some of those small things made a big difference to the extent to which they engaged in the service. And another one was working with an organisation that was supporting vulnerable women, and they were interested in what sort of digital options they could use and what funding options they could use to try and help do some new and interesting things. And so we went through a creative process. It was sort of more starting off with what are a whole lot of ideas that we can then test against I guess the market or users, and then start to prototype. And so some of those ideas that they're working on are things like giving circles, where they're mobilising friendship groups to give sort of as a collective, so creating a sort of peer network of philanthropy, micro campaigns where people are sort of giving to specific one-off things like helping women to do a short course or to get new work clothes. And other kinds of capital raising initiatives of that nature. So that's, I guess another example where we're using some of these techniques. I guess a couple of quick points before we sort of finish up our content and open up for any questions is what we're finding from this kind of work is that the solutions emerge iteratively. And so you start up with just an idea, and as you test that idea, the idea will change. And as you learn more about it, you build up more detail. So it's sort of it feels like it sort of emerges organically through this back and forth process where you're testing things with colleagues and with customers. But the trick to success is to start to test early and to take I guess a learning orientation, and that if you first idea really doesn't hit the mark, you don't want to hold on to it too long. You want to respond and adapt and go with the signals of what will work. And I guess as a final point, when you are doing this work well and you do really rethink things and go through a process where you explore entirely new possibilities and it works and you scale up, it can allow you to hit a lot of performance benefits in combination. So rather than having to make some of those traditional trade-offs around cost and customer needs, some of these models we're seeing now allow you to really radically increase customer or public value at quite a lot lower cost. And that's what's really exciting about the sort of stuff that we're seeing now. So final bit around winning support for your idea.
This is a bit of a digression, but given the context or the setup with David Thompson about the Empowering Youth initiatives, we thought, well, in terms of writing proposals or at least pitching your idea to win support, what does that look like if in the space of innovative methods and innovative approaches? Well, it looks a bit different. So in this kind of more complex and uncertain environments, the way that you pitch ideas changes a little. So it becomes more about the need to win support for new ideas, and more about winning support than convincing people with analysis and data and evidence, because there often isn't that much data or evidence or analysis in these cases. It's more the strength of your argument that will be more successful in winning the support to trial this new approach, this new innovation. And to be successful, winning support means that your pitch helps people make sense of this complex environment. And it's complex and uncertain, but if I can help you make sense of it, that will be helpful to you. If I can, for example, distill the 2 or 3 key trends that are really changing things with our clients. And then it's about grasping the essence of the strategic shift. What is it then that needs to change here? What do we need to do differently? And then it's often about, so then where do we need to focus more energy, more resources, more attention? This is not a plan, it's just sort of the direction and more energy and attention, the places that we'll go exploring and do more work in than we traditionally have because we think it's promising. We think there's more opportunity here. In pitches like this, the look and feel is different. And so not only should it be, if it's winning support, there's a much higher premium on visual design, but there's also a higher premium on, well, what's the compelling narrative then? What's the story that helps people grasp this argument and ultimately the pitch? And there's a few different ways of constructing narratives, but this is quite a useful one. This is one from a book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, which says in the end, that underpinning all good narratives is a story that starts with the diagnosis that makes sense of what's otherwise overwhelming complexity, reduces it to its 2 or 3 or 4 key elements. Then the guiding policy. So what's the change here? What's the signpost? What's the shift? And then, so this is what we need to do to give expression to this. Actions that we'll take next to get traction. And you need each of those bits of the story in order for people to say, oh yeah, I follow that. That makes sense to me. I'm willing to support that. Last idea. This is kind of an oldie but a goodie. I think whenever you're pitching for government funds, it's always interesting to think what's public value, and the idea of public value being public value is shifting and contested and always changing. But usually you want to pay attention to 3 tests, which are on the bottom left. Is it this idea substantively valuable? Is it a solid, robust idea that's supported by research or makes sense because it's we've got a little bit of evidence to support it, or good argument to support it, or research overseas points to being promising? Is it politically sustainable? Is it able to win the support from the authorising environment because it plays to what are the key trends that governments and politicians are particularly interested in, find compelling at the time? And is it also operationally and administratively feasible? Can we deliver it either with our collaborators or by ourselves, or with who we collaborate with? And probably behind that really is, does the person we're pitching to has confidence in our capabilities to be able to pull this off? I kind of think that's a nice thing to always keep in the back of your mind as you sort of craft arguments to pitch ideas. And that's it. That's so in terms of touching on, I guess, 3 related questions. What do we mean by innovative approaches then? What's NASA's approach to service or innovative service design? How do you win support for innovative ideas?
Great. So thank you very much for that. If anyone has any questions at this point, is the best opportunity to ask them right now. I'm just having a look at the attendees and I can't see anyone raising their hand, and at this point we have no questions in the question box. So I'll just give anyone who does want to ask a question another opportunity before we finish up. Of course, we will be making the slides available via our website, and we've also recorded this webinar, so you'll be able to access a recording of the webinar afterwards and double check any of the information that you've been presented with today. And if you do have questions and you haven't had a chance to ask them, then you can of course email Jobs Australia and we'll try and get you an answer. We have had one question come through on the questions box, and that question is, what do you think are good early engagement methods with service users on new ideas? So I'll hand it over to our speakers if either of you have a response on that one.
I think here it's good to get inspiration from what professionals in market research have been doing for a really long time. So there's some quite well-established methods for this kind of thing. I think, yeah, I think it can be good to do exploratory conversations to start off with. So not going straight to surveys with leading questions, but more one-on-one or group conversations where you might only have 3 broad questions, but the idea is to really let people say what's front of mind for them and not lead them too much towards your preconceived ideas. So whether it's individuals or in groups depends on what it is you're wanting to explore and how sensitive it is, and whether you're going to get more from letting people bounce off each other or from just finding in more detail what an individual's experience is. But I'd be recommending that sort of more qualitative conversational research to start off with. And I guess there's yeah, if you're wanting to test ideas, it's probably good, if you haven't done any engagement, first to just ask people a bit about what their sort of goals or motivations or feelings or thoughts are around that specific thing, and then wait till you've got that before then testing an idea, because again, you'll kind of be leading them, and there might be some really good things you can find out before you put an idea on the table. Yeah.
Yeah. And focus groups and things like that, do they cost a lot of money? Is it something that's resource intensive, or is it something that you can do, fairly cost effectively?
I think it depends a bit on whether they're people that you can easily recruit, or you're sort of going out through like panels to get random members of the public that aren't otherwise in any way connected to your organisation. If they're people that you have a relationship with and you can sort of ask them in for, you give them a voucher, an incentive or something for their time, then that's fairly cost effective. But yeah, if you're, say, a bank that wants to go into an entirely new market segment and you want to survey thousands of people and you want to incentivise all of them, that's an expensive process. Yeah.
Yep. Excellent. Well, that's been great. Give people one last opportunity.
So approach we sometimes use, it's rather than focus groups, if we want to engage quite a large group, is open space as a conference method, where you invite a lot of people who are passionate about an idea. There's no limits on the numbers, and you ask them to set the agenda, which is tell us around the issues or the opportunities that they have some passion for in the broad thing. And that's a nice way to start getting a sense of what people really care about and are concerned about through both the agenda that's set and then the conversations that people have around that in an engaging way.
Yeah, and that method's interesting because it was based on the recognition that at conferences often the best bits are the conversations you have in the breaks over coffee and at lunch. So how do you create a whole conference that is basically that, and then you capture the great ideas and insights that have been had in those casual conversations?
That's an excellent point. Yeah, we obviously have our own conference once a year, and that's part of our experience as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So, okay, we don't have any other questions coming through, and no one is raising their virtual hand. So we might bring it to the close if there's no other questions. One last opportunity. No? All right. Well, thank you very much to our speakers today.
Thanks for having us.
I think that's been an excellent presentation, and like I said, all the resources will be available on our website afterwards. Thank you everyone for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.